I've just come back from Iraq. I was there about 2 weeks ago. My own view is that the various timelines of getting the United States out of cities, say by this summer, ceasing all combat operations by a year from this summer, and getting all U.S. forces out of Iraq over the next 2.5 or so years. I believe that there's no way those timelines can be met and have Iraq not once again really descend into a lot more disorder. I simply do not believe that the Iraqi police and military forces will be able and willing to take on those kinds of responsibilities. I don't believe that the Iraqi society has reached a point where it can be a self-sustaining, orderly place without American forces there. So my hope and my prediction is that sometime after next January's Iraqi national elections, the new Iraqi prime minister and the president of the United States are going to have to work out a new arrangement where essentially the reductions or drawdowns in U.S. forces will move more slowly. And secondly, we will keep some kind of a residual force in Iraq where there will not be a withdrawal. But my view is if we stick slavishly or automatically to these timelines, I don't believe Iraq would be ready for the responsibilities that it would inherit if and when we left. Well, not exactly. The surge, which really consisted of several pieces. There was the increase in U.S. combat forces. There was the change in strategy, which is probably even more significant, away from offensive, so-called kinetic combat operations, much more into a traditional counterinsurgency strategy of clearing out the enemy and then providing security to the citizenry. There was the diplomatic part of it, of buying off a lot of the Sunni tribesmen and fighters who had been directly or indirectly supporting radicalism and terrorism. So all of this came together. And indeed, it was probably the most orderly decision-making process of George W. Bush's presidency. And it showed where a large outside disciplined force that had adapted its tactics and its strategy, in this case to counterinsurgency, could make a real difference. I thought it was, in retrospect, I think it was a smart thing to do. The problem now is whether we can use the time and space that the surge have created to help the Iraqis build up a self-sustaining police and military capability. And the jury's out. And I would simply say that probably the best we can hope for with Iraq is a somewhat messy future, not a future that looks like civil war, but it also won't be a shining city on a hill. And my view is that the best way to keep a floor under Iraq's future so it looks okay is probably by keeping a residual American force for years to come or even longer. Now, this could become a fateful set of decisions for the Obama administration. It's ironic that Barack Obama ran against Iraq, said it was a terrible war of choice. He is going to probably face some fateful choices with Iraq about whether to continue with his timelines. And then if he does, my fear is that then things will begin to unravel, and then he could face, again, some terrible decisions about whether to recommit U.S. forces into a messy situation. Well, he's doing things that I support. I believe in diplomacy. I don't believe in talking to Iran somehow constitutes a concession or a favor. I think he's right to drop the preconditions. What matters in a negotiation is not so much where you begin, but where you end. So I think all that is to the good. The problem is that he faces an extraordinarily difficult situation where the Iranians have gotten quite far. They've obviously already produced a large amount of low-enriched uranium. If they were to put it back in their centrifuges and reinforce those centrifuges, they could produce the basic stuff of a nuclear device. Then they would have to weaponize it. So my hunch is he is offering to change American foreign policy at a time when the Iranians are already pretty far down the path of having produced the raw material for a nuclear weapon. And it's not clear to me that the pace of diplomacy can match the pace of technology. And what's slowing diplomacy down even more is the upcoming Iranian election. But I think he's right to try this because the two alternatives to negotiating a ceiling an acceptable ceiling on the Iranian program, one that we could conceivably live with. The two alternatives are not attractive. The idea of using military force against Iran is an unbelievably unattractive option because it's not clear what it would accomplish, and it's also clear the Iranians would retaliate in some expensive ways. It also would drive the price of oil up dramatically, it's something we don't need. And it's not at all attractive to live with an Iranian nuclear capability, given Iran's rhetoric, given its support for terrorism, and given that it would place the Middle East on a hair trigger, and given that other countries in the region could well follow suit. And as bad as the Middle East is today, one can imagine a situation that would grow worse if, say, Iran, Israel, and half a dozen Arab countries over the next 25 years had nuclear capabilities. So that would be a nightmare. So I believe the president's exactly right to try to negotiate our way out of this. I don't think those negotiations can be expected to solve this, if by solution you mean come up with an Iran that does not enrich uranium. My own hunch is that we would have to be prepared potentially to allow Iran to have an amount of uranium. We could talk about the amount of uranium, the production capacity, but it would depend upon, I believe, the level of inspections. We would have to be able to convince ourselves to a high degree that this was all they had, and what they had was not the sort of stuff that was so-called weapons grade, but rather it was the sort of stuff that you would need for a reactor to produce electricity. Now, I would feel better if Iraq had the means in place to produce electricity, and they don't. So again, you've got to be wildly suspicious, but so far at least they haven't crossed that red line. They've not taken the so-called low-enriched uranium up to high enrichment, but if they do, then Barack Obama could face one of the fateful days of his presidency, because either the Israelis might decide that is intolerable, or he himself might be pressured to declare it intolerable and then act upon it. It's a good question, and after less than 4 months, it's a little bit hard to tell. But this is a president who obviously listens carefully to his own counsel. He's got people like Bob Gates at the Secretary of Defense, who has, I believe, a lot of influence. He's got a retired general as his national security advisor in the person of Jim Jones. You've got someone like David Petraeus, the central commander, who obviously has tremendous influence, both still over Iraq, but also over the conflict in Afghanistan. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mike Mullen, is probably spending more time in Pakistan these days than he is in Washington. You've got a Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, who's active, plus you've got any number of special envoys. I would think the difference with the Bush administration is you actually have more players here, that you don't have necessarily any single person who might have quite the weight, say, of a Dick Cheney. But what you have is a large number of people, and the real challenge for the administration, I will think, will be coordinating all these people and making trade-offs, because in addition to Iraq, Afghanistan, you do have the challenge in Pakistan, you do have the challenge coming because of Iran's nuclear program, and you've got all the issues that arise from everything with dealing with great powers, to North Korea, to the global economy, to climate change, to swine flu. So it's an enormously crowded foreign policy inbox, and determining trade-offs, priorities, sequencing, and so forth is going to be a real challenge for the administration.